welcome to this fifth webinar, the SAM Best Practice webinar that happens once a month. Every month, we address some of the topics that are related to best practices, and today's topic is the content of the next coming version, which is FlexNet or Flexera 1 ITAM 2021 R1.4. And the two topics we will cover today are around the management of Windows Server optimization, which is coming in March, a new report, as well as Java embedded that will be allowed by a new feature that will allow to embed the Java instances or exempt the Java instances from consuming when they are related to other applications. Hopefully the sound is okay now. And going through the agenda. We will start with the last session pointers and answers to questions. There were not so many. We will then, talk about the news, and the news is a little bit what will be the content of this monthly SAM Best Practice webinar. So we will focus on Java after having talked about Windows Server optimization. And we will go step by step, how FlexNet Manager and Flexera 1 ITAM recognize the Java restricted and public versions. We will also go through the exemption bypass new feature that will be released very soon, that will be released in March. And finally, we will do a demo. I will do a demo which end-to-end will show how to manage Java with FlexNet Manager or with Flexera 1 ITAM. So first, the useful pointers, the recording and PowerPoint presentation of the last presentation, which was on the metering. It was a November SAM Best Practice call, and you can access, and you will get the link in this presentation. You can access the recording and the detailed agenda and the content of this presentation, which was in this. Okay, so you will get the link to actually the November SAM Best Practice call. November, which was actually I will update the. Okay, so November SAM Best Practice and recording. Yeah. So the recording was here. You will get the link to the recording, which contains the details on this session, which was on metering. That has three attached presentations and some links. So I let you go to and follow the link in the presentation that you will find. Follow the link to catch and get the details of the recording. Moving back to the PowerPoint. There were some questions, limited number of questions. So some questions were around the fact that the slide was mentioning installed through WMI package. This was MSI package, sorry, which then we capture eventually as a WMI entry in the recognition. So definitely the usage collection out of the box with the agent for the files is limited to the files for applications installed through MSI package. Then there was a quite long question or comment, which was around the fact that unrecognized evidences may be complex to manage and to identify, particularly for the file evidences. And so there will be a new solution published as a knowledge base article in February. This is a report that I created a while ago, which is around the installer evidence to be recognized. So it's a report which is catching any unrecognized installer evidence, which is matching an existing installer evidence, which is recognized and eventually linked to a licensed application. So the report will sort of identify among the big amounts of evidence which ones could be the top priority ones given the past recognition. I'm currently extending the logic of this report to also manage the file evidences. And both reports will be published in February. I would say I'm 80% into the file evidence one, and that will be soon available for on-prem customers. And this will be a very good candidate for our out-of-the-box features, knowing that any report reading file evidences or unrecognized file evidence can have some big challenges for the performance. And you will see the Java extension that we have will allow to better collect and understand the evidence between the mapping between the file evidences and the recognized applications. But we need to find ways to limit the quantity of data that is managed and parsed by these queries, because this can be very massive amount of file evidences, really in the billions. So talking about the news, Flexera 1 2021 R1.4, the next version is planned for mid-March 2022, and will contain a number of features. So the Windows Server optimization, that I will describe a little bit more. It will also contain the automated management of Java embedded instances, and also a new chargeback REST API that I will describe a little bit more, because I will deep dive on the two other features. So the chargeback REST API will allow to any customer who queries this REST API to get a flat view on the license consumption. Just to give you an idea, and that's something that was released actually with 2021 R1, some new reports. If I go to the reports, some new reports provide the optimization data and consumption data for Oracle. And this report, for instance, gives the details of the Oracle license consumption. And you will see that actually it is not just giving the details, which is, which cluster is under which CV center, which has which host installed with virtual machines, but there was a first step towards chargeback, which was, the ability to compute installed virtual machine by installed virtual machine, how much is actually rechargeable to the virtual machine, given the fact that the cluster with Oracle is carrying the consumption. So in the end, there is a small calculation in this report, which has been sort of extended to all license types, which catches any consumption at any level. It could be the device when it's a per device license, or it could be the host. If it's a server license like Windows Server, SQL Server, or Oracle, or IBM. And there are some, calculations which take the consumption down to the installed devices, because very often what will happen is that the host is shared, while the virtual machines are used by entities, and they are linked to cost centers or corporate units. And the idea is to take the consumption up to the cluster and roll it down to the VMs accordingly to the number of cores in the VMs. So it's basically, number of cores of the VM divided by total number of cores across VMs in the cluster which are installed with this Oracle database product. And the consumption will be reflecting for the installed device a value, which is a number of points, but also quantity of number of points or a cost. And the chargeback API is doing nothing else than taking this data. And here I'm showing the result of what the query is. The query will retrieve flatly, device per device, user per user, quite a quantity of information that includes the IDs. But also the important thing, which is, how much is consumed and how much is recharged. So this is coming soon, but this is showing a direction that FlexNet and Flexera 1 ITAM is taking, which is moving from a compliance tool, able to manage contracts, purchase, inventory, and make the match, moving from this position to, I would say, a higher value proposition, which is optimizing your license consumption. That would be the Windows Server consumption report, or all the already released reports around Oracle or Red Hat or SQL Server, but also allowing to integrate software asset management into the other processes of the company, and allowing to recharge the costs for licenses from the organization to charging to the organizations the cost of what they're using on a monthly basis, for instance. So typically, the data can be used by Aptio, which is a financial management tool, but also Flexera One has an optimization, cost optimization module called Optima. And the idea is to go towards a chargeback engine, which will allow to compute the consumption and the cost data provided by IT asset management and by the software asset management calculations. Okay, so this is a little deep dive on the REST API, and just to go back to what was recently performed and recently released. As every time we are having this call, I will point you to the community, to the documentation, which is open, so you don't even need to log to get here, docs.flexera.com. And if you pick up FlexNet Manager Cloud, you will get this feature by release documentation that month by month will show you what has been released. So the last session we had was in November. So I just wanted to emphasize one or two things that were released in December. The first one is the auto cleanup of obsolete FlexNet inventory. That's something that has been asked for a long time. That there is now a mechanism that allows to set up in FlexNet, in Flexera One ITAM, a duration for which we will allow the system to automatically delete the aging inventory device, which means that technically it's deleting the records from the inventory manager database. So it means it's a real cleanup. It's not just like a UI cleanup that may turn into the device coming back the next day. So just like SCCM, Flexera One ITAM is able to auto clean up the aging or the old inventory data. Very interesting in terms of saving space, avoiding duplicates or merged device. That's a very interesting one. Another one that was released in December is about replicating the files on the beacons, which allows to minimize or to eventually monitor and troubleshoot any issue that would happen with the inventory uploads. So this new feature allows to save on the local folder all the data related to disk, so NDI files or Disco files, all these files that are exchanged during the inventory transfer. Okay, and then the SQL Server optimization report that I already presented. So these are the recent things that got released in December. And just to expand a little bit, there were two changes that were applied to the ERL, which have quite an impact. We have communicated that on the community, but it's good you get this information. Adobe is no longer Creative Cloud, actually. Creative Cloud is no longer recognized as a suite. So each of the standalone products is now recognized, which gives more transparency. And if you create a license, which is a Creative Cloud license with a bundle, which is how the license is defined by the SKU, you will still get, the named user license covering each of the 13 products of the Creative Cloud suite, so that you don't lose in functionality, and you will keep and you will have now the visibility with no longer Creative Cloud suite application being recognized, because it is hiding the standalone components, and in an end user license there is no value in doing that. Another announcement that has been done, beyond all the new applications that have been added to the recognition library, another thing has been around the Oracle Universal Installer Evidences, that are no longer used to recognize the options applications. So the agent Oracle inventory collect the data. We'll create all the signatures instead of evidence which are used to recognize or to create options installations. And eventually, the usage of the application will be set up by the Oracle inventory. But no longer OUI evidences will trigger the creation of this sort of false positive. Advanced compression was on the machine, and there was no instance related to it, so it was very hard to understand, what was happening. We just took away any OUI evidence. They are now all ignored. And for the Oracle database, that's a big topic that has been discussed many, many times. The Oracle unspecified editions are created by the Oracle Universal Installer Evidences, not by the agent inventory. So we have limited as much as possible. Oracle database unspecified will be recognized on a device only if no version of Oracle Database Enterprise or Standard Edition has been recognized for any future version, which means that if you had Oracle 12, you upgraded your server with Oracle 18. What was happening was that the Oracle evidence was, OUI evidence was leaving a 12C signature. This is no longer the case, so it will clean up a lot of these false positives or question marks that you had in the inventory, and this has been performed through what we call precedence rules, which allow to remove an application if another is recognized. Okay, and the next FlexNet on-premise release, no change on that, will be in April 2022. So that will be the 2022 R1 version. Okay, so let's talk now quickly about Windows Server before moving to Java. Windows Server is complex, and that's what I would call poisonous choices. You have two editions of Windows Server, Standard Edition and Data Center. You can purchase Windows Server Standalone or the bundle, which is Core Infrastructure Server Suite, CIS. And CIS covers Windows Server plus SCCM or System Center. And the complexities reside in the licensing of Windows Server. You have complex calculations, which is something that FlexNet completely covers today. There is a minimum number of cores per server, 16. There is a minimum number of cores per processor, 8. And you have quite complex calculations if you have more Windows Server, more virtual machines on hosts. If you use a Standard Edition, you will pay more. And there is another rule, which beyond the calculation is a real pain with Windows Server. It's the license assignment rule that was called mobility. For Standard Edition, if you have used a Windows Server Standard Edition license to cover an ESX server, if you have a low number of virtual machines, typically, the rule says you can't reuse this license for 90 days. So this is a sort of a complexity that is meaningful. Virtual machines keep moving, so the Microsoft decided to have a rule where if you don't pay a lot, which is the case of Windows Server Standard Edition, you need to pay proportionally to the number of virtual machines. But because this number is constantly moving, they have this mobility rule that has been created. So this is all this makes it very complicated. And what happens is that most of customers today license Windows Server and use Data Center Edition for the ESX servers to be safe and to have the maximum number of cores covered and any number of virtual machines. The licensing choices, in addition to the complexities I was describing that people need to make, are around, should you use Windows Server Data Center to cover a virtual machine that would be installed in Data Center Edition? To be honest, the functionality of Data Center Edition and Standard Edition are exactly the same. So there are mixed approaches, but most of people say, no, Windows Server is Windows Server. What matters is the number of VMs to make a choice. That's the first, choice that people need to do when they do Windows Server compliance position. Second thing is, of course, are you using Windows Server or Windows Server and CIS, Core Infrastructure Server? And the final one is, how do you want to count? Are you using the worst case, which is what people were doing, or are you using the new possibility that Flexera 1 ITAM will provide from March on? And of course, what we encourage is you to take advantage of this new feature that really represents millions and millions for large organizations. Licensing all ESX servers, in 20,000 virtual machines and 3,000 ESX servers organization costs, with Data Center Edition, 15 million euro more than what it would cost with applying, an optimal license consumption, like the report is computing. So what does the report do and how does it work? You have some inputs. You can pick up if you want to use Windows Server and CIS, for instance, or Windows Server only, or Core Infrastructure only. So this is something that will influence the calculation that will be performed and that will check the presence of a system center on the VMs or in the clusters. Second thing that you put as an input in the report is, do you want a safe approach? Any VM which is in Data Center Edition will be licensed with Data Center Edition, even if it's in a cluster which has very few virtual machines in Windows Server. Or do you want to be less safe, which means that you can cover anything with a Windows Server Standard Edition. That's an option. And finally, the third main input will be around the metric you want to use to compute, what is the best licensing choice. We don't suggest, the current number of VMs, which is not in alignment with the Windows mobility or license assignment rule. So you will have a choice between using the worst case, which is a high cost, very safe, the 90-day peak, which is this new way of catching VM host per host, the number of VMs for 91 days and catching the peak number of virtual machines, or another metric which is based on the current situation, cluster per cluster, the report will catch the highest number of VMs in one of the hosts in the cluster. So it's a sort of between the worst case, which is very pessimistic and a big present to Microsoft, and the 90-day peak, which is the actual peak, where the data is really optimized. And the report will allow to, once you run the report, you have made the choice, you can eventually hide the orphan virtual machines. And the report will calculate, so for the physical computers, it's quite simple. But for the VM hosts, it will calculate, taking the 90-day peak number of VMs, checking if there is a system center or not in the cluster where the host is sitting, checking a number of things, and there will be a quite exhaustive documentation. The report will compute the optimal license to use for the ESX server, and you will get a good view on the best license to use, and host per host, the report will compute what would have been the cost using Data Center Edition, what would have been the cost using the Standard Edition, and it will, if the recommendation is to use Standard Edition, you will have the saving that will be displayed. So of course, if you were using a lot of data center and few Standard Edition, it doesn't mean that you can give your licenses back to Microsoft unless you had a select agreement, an enterprise subscription, where you can renew the subscriptions year after year. If you have a more classical enterprise agreement, you may decide to stop paying maintenance for Data Center Edition, or you may decide to, with the money you save on this standard Data Center Edition SA, so transference, you will be able to purchase more Standard Edition licenses, which will allow you to change the mix you have and really save a lot of money. Moving forward now to the management of Java. Java is, I will start with the Java challenges around inventory, the Java for servers against Java for desktops, the topic of embedded instances, and then, I will demo and show you what is the FlexNet Manager and the Flexera 1 ITAM answer to these challenges, and with the version to come, which will be 2021 R1.4 for cloud, or 2022 R1 in April, you will have the full ability to manage end-to-end this very, very painful topic of Java. So just to set the context, in 2019, Oracle has made the GDK and GRE licensable for all editions, which means that all new versions that have been released after this 2019 need to be licensed. And just to set the context, Java Standard Edition, Java Platform Standard Edition, is composed of the GRE, the GDK, and in the end, you have a java.exe file, which is what we use to recognize Java, and the rule and the change has been that all customers that were using Java for free, unless they wanted to have a maintenance, some customers who were already licensed for a maintenance on Java to take advantage of support. But in 2019, a brutal decision has been made to request a license for any newer version starting from this date. So any newer version, that's where the complexity is. It's about the new major versions, Java the Java 11 became licensable, and the next versions too. And by the way, Java 17 is no longer licensable, so there is a 3-year hold on this policy or licensing policy. But what happened is that any new version was licensable. They call that restricted. Any new update was restricted, and any new build was restricted, which means that the recognition. You have to pay for what is new in the end. You could use eventually OpenJDK to replace Java in your architectures, but this is a complex migration. I discussed with a number of customers who said, yeah, it's technically feasible, but it's very complex. So it means, you need to manage in the end what is your Java estate and understand if it's licensable. And one item which is important to keep in mind is that Java is not always licensable, even for the recent versions, because it could be embedded, included in some Oracle licensed applications. There is a link here that will show you the middleware applications that include Java, like WebLogic, for instance. Or also some vendors, IBM, have license agreements with Oracle. So the Java version which is installed with that product is covered by the license terms of IBM. So that makes a quite complex situation where you need to understand, what needs to be licensed. And this is a summary of the nightmare of the ARL team, or the nightmare of some of you trying to work on Java and understand the risk, or the number of licenses you need to subscribe. So Java 5, I will not go line by line, but there is a mix, between the updates. Some older updates will always be free. That's easy. Some newer updates will be, you will have to pay for that. If we take Java 8, 211 and up will be restricted. But what makes it a little bit more complex is that the builds eventually released on an older update, let's say update 201, build 31, will be restricted. So that leads to a complexity of recognizing Java, and we have made a number of changes, and we have heard some of you complaining a little bit that The visibility of the data was made complicated by what we have done, but there was a good reason. So what we have done in April 2021 is normalize Java up to the major version, but each, and that's what I will show, if you go to the, let's say, Java 8, Platform 8 application, you will see that you have many file evidences which have patterns that reflect exactly these rules that I was showing, which are, this update 221, for instance, is restricted. But also, you see on the bottom, there are some patterns around the builds. So any update, even a free one, unfortunately, or the 41 build, and knowing that the 31 build is the first one that got restricted, needs to be licensed. So that's a complex story, because in the end, the inventory is collecting raw evidences, raw files. Each file has a version number which is super precise, and including now the Unix version numbers. So that's an important thing to understand, that we have enhanced the agent. The Unix agent has been extended in 2021 R1, a little bit before actually, for the cloud customers. And the agent now is able to run the Java-version command and collect the information and parse the information that includes, the build. So anyone you see in your FlexNet or Flexera 1 ITAM instance some matches to these evidences, which have a slash in the name, typically, that's a Unix file. Anytime you see these evidences, it means that you have some agents which are 2021 and above that have collected the data. So that's a big critical thing for you. If you have a Java process, if you want to understand your estate for both Windows and Unix, you absolutely need to have the latest version of the agent that will collect the Unix file evidences. So we create these evidences as file evidences, and they include a path, which you will see is a very important next step. So maybe to show a little bit FlexNet Manager, if I go to all applications, for instance. So let's go to all applications, and you will see that if you product starts with Java platform, you will see that we have two products actually. One which is public, and one which has no mention of public. So these two products really are the restricted or commercial versions, you see here, or free versions of Java platform. So this is the basics of the recognition. And if you open one of these applications, one thing we're shifting currently is that the recognition for these applications will no longer be based on the installer, because the installer evidence doesn't have the build number or doesn't have at least the raw path that we need to use the new feature of the embedded path. So if you see the files here, you recognize the patterns, and that's how the recognition happens. It's either by the update number or by the build number that the commercial versions of Java Platform 8, for instance, are recognized. So that's the first step, and that was a painful one, and we keep fine-tuning, because we discover sometime a build which is supposed to be a commercial, but that is actually public, or the reverse. So there is still a little bit of movement, but we're now I would say in a good shape regarding these recognitions. And the next step is, okay, now we recognize Java, that's good, but how do we make sure that the Java instances which are installed on servers, which have, let's say, CBEL, an example, if I take here, how do we make sure that these instances will not be accounted for licensable, because If you take the Java documentation, the Oracle documentation, you don't need to pay for Java if it's supporting the Cibel product, for instance, or the Oracle client also includes a Java instance. So there was a need in FlexNet Manager to manage this sort of exemption, knowing that it's not the classical exemption you could do with the license. You could create a Cibel license, and every time Cibel has been found, the Cibel server has been found on a server, it would, also cover Java as a supplementary product. That's an easy way. We could have performed that, but given the complexity of Java, you will see there are more than one Java instance per server. So you could have Java 8 standard edition installed 5 times, 3 times related to maybe the Oracle client or Cibel. Very good, they're covered. But 2 other times, they are not related to products that embed Java. So there was a need for a new feature, which comes with this with this March release, sorry. The new feature, which is called, the exemption bypass. It's a little bit cryptic, but the idea that we don't change the recognition. There is a new report, which is called Application Transparency Report. This report will show you the links between the applications that have been recognized and the raw evidences. And that's a thing that you can use for all other applications in FlexNet. That has been a requirement, and numerous ideas have been open on that. I would like to see, if across my servers, not going to the evidence type of the device, I would like to see across my devices the recognized applications and what raw evidences allow to recognize these applications. So this new version and this new feature comes with this transparency report, and you will see there is a need to flag the application to be monitored for raw evidence. And the reason for this sort of a selective management of which applications will return this type of information is that the file evidences very quickly turn into millions or billions of rows. That's what we see for the large customers. It's common to have 20 billion file evidence, installed file evidence, and we could not have a feature that would query these big tables. So we have this feature, this flag to put on the application. I will show you. So first step, understand where Java is. This is a report. Part of the information is where it is installed. The second step is, once you understand your Java state, you will define yourself. That's one thing that is worth mentioning. We don't, Flexera will not take the liability of giving the embedded path. So this is not content. This will not be coming with the ARL, for instance. What I guess is that some customers will exchange on the community. We'll share together, which are the typical applications which are covered for Java. And, the one that come in mind to me are SQL developer, Oracle SQL developer, the Oracle client, Cibel, WebLogic, but there are more, IBM applications, or I've seen Symantec agents also, including Java being covered. So there is a little bit of research. There is a little bit of decision to make to decide, what path will be embedded. But then once you have decided and set up the embedded path, you will let the license do the job. And each license, when it calculates, will check. That's a little bit complicated process, I will show, but we check which are the evidences that led to recognizing Java, which will be covered by the license. And this flag that you see, exemption, reason, exempted by file path, will be shown every time an installation of Java, which should be consuming a license, will be related only to file, to path, which are embedded, which means that there was no real Java application to license. And the big thing is to give you the transparency end-to-end. That's the challenge. So I'm going to show that the next step, an end-to-end process in FlexNet Manager or in Flexera 1, you need to create 2 licenses to manage Java. That's quite simple. One for servers, one for desktops. Once you have the licenses created, you need to allocate the servers to the server license and the desktop to the desktop license. We will have later in the year a new feature called intelligent restriction, which would be a way for saying to a license, this is the scope of what you are managing, and that would be a computer group or a user group, depending on the license type. And this user group or computer group, imagine you create a report. This report contains a filter that could be quite advanced. Typically, the filter would be my operating system is, does not contain Windows or contains a Windows Server, for instance. This is what we could categorize by servers. So this feature will allow in the future to manage the production, non-production use case. IBM products have that sometimes. It will allow to manage named user plus versus processor servers. You will create a report that will show your named user plus servers, and the license will not try to cover anything outside of the scope if it's an up license. But waiting for this new feature, you will need to allocate manually and maintain the allocations, which is, I will show you, not a big deal. Third step, you will need to understand what is your estate of Java deployed applications, and you will need to tweak on the 2 licenses the exemption path section. You will need to wait for the next import to see, observe and tweak again. Exemption path will remove some of the consumptions, and you will need to refine a little bit. Eventually, find where some paths that were maybe not understood at the first step could lead to embedded applications. And in the end, you will have, with this state, a visibility on your 2 types of licenses, the Oracle processor Java license, which will be covering servers, and the the user license, which will covering the desktops. Let's go to FlexNet. So I was showing here, the java.exe. If I go to all licenses, I will not create the licenses in front of you, but these are quite simple licenses. One is an Oracle processor. The other is a user license, because Java Desktop is licensed per user. Important thing, you need to have the users allocated to the computers. Normally this is calculated. When it's a Windows computer, we get the last logged user, the most frequent logged user, and we compute, the calculated user. And the processor license, we need to cover the servers. If I open just one of the 2 licenses, they are quite simple. I created them from the wizard. And in the wizard, I picked up Java platform. This is the commercial version. And I created the license applying upgrades and downgrade rights. The goal is to cover any commercial version of Java that you see here. And when creating the license, I picked up the Oracle processor license type, which is then, leading to this type of calculations, where you see, a host, a cluster is on top of a host, which has another host. And this is a very classical consumption that you would see with an Oracle database license. And the trickier thing, once you have created your 2 licenses, basically the license covers the same products. The 2 licenses are doing the same job, covering all the Java platform commercial applications. But one is in a processor and will be intended for the servers. The other is per user. And that have a different license type. And the big thing would then be to allocate the users and the servers to the right license. Otherwise, and until we have this new feature, intelligent license restriction, the calculation will randomly cover the deployed Java instances or applications. We'll cover them with one or the other indistinctly. So there is no way to restrict the licenses. So to apply the optimization, what I did is, the allocation, sorry. What I did is start from this screen, which you probably know. You can edit, the filter. This is a quite clever filter. So if you say Java platform, okay. FlexNet here will check, which are the licenses, which are the applications, and which are the products which contain Java platform. And if I open the product, if I check the product list, that's what I want. This is the Oracle Java platform product, knowing that the other one is called public. So it's not the same product. So here, if I select that, I know that I will see on the bottom the list of servers which are eventually covered by a license and which have installations. And this view is a little bit complex, but it shows, this first column shows if you have installed devices, if you have allocated devices, or both. And both is really what we want to do. If I filter on that, and here I will edit the filter. So this is, this is a Windows server or does not contain Windows. So here, this is a list of servers, basically. And the license is, installed. It means there is no allocation. And the idea is to create two views, thanks to this advanced filter, which will show you which are the servers which are not yet allocated to the Java server license, and that will show which are the devices, desktops, which are not yet allocated to the desktop license. So that's a little bit painful, but honestly, preparing this presentation, it took 20 minutes. You can create management views, because once you're on the once you have made your filter, you can save as, and then you can create a management view. So I've created two of them. One which is desktops with Java to allocate to the Java desktop license, and another which is servers Java with Java to allocate to the Java server license. And the idea that each, I will open the desktop now. There is another filter that says, the license is, it is just installed. No allocation exists for this line. The operating system contains Windows, but does not contain server. So it will filter out Windows Server. It will filter out any Red Hat Enterprise Linux or other Unix operating system. And here you have a clean list of all your devices which are not yet allocated to the device license. There is a little thing, so for user license, you can allocate a device to a user license only if there is a user who is already allocated to the license. So that's because otherwise it cannot calculate per user, of course. So that said, you need to have this first step, allocating on each side. Second thing is to understand, the embedded path or your Java estate. So I will go here to the new version. This is a sort of a preview of the future version that comes in March, and there is a new report, which is called, the Application Transparency Report. Okay. So you see this license compliance application transparency report. Here it is. So it's also in the application tab. And if you run the report will show you, there is a number of columns. That's a little bit a downside of the complexity. But the report will show for the applications which have been flagged to be monitored. So out of the box, Java platform, any version will be monitored. So here, for the test, I also flagged Spectrum Protect to see, that it was correctly added to this report. And once you have flagged the applications, I will show you which field to use, where the flag needs to be put. The report will give you the full explanation. This java.exe with this exact version, with this description, with this size, is, with this installation path, very important, is installed and has been recognized as a Java platform thanks to this evidence. So we have concatenated, this is the Oracle person, java.exe, and this version, which is a person. So you see here the summary of the matched evidence in the ARL. And you will see here the inventory date, which is the server inventory date, and which is the recognized application. Eventually, if there is a suite, which is the standalone application and the suite, or the suite member, sorry, and the recognized application in the end. The name of the server, where it was found, the operating system. So you will get, all these things, plus, one or two things which are new. And maybe before I'm doing that, I will open Java 8 standard in a new tab, just to show you that the flag that allows to manage the details for the evidences is called, import detailed evidence. So by default, Java will come with that. You can add application by application this flag. But we intentionally, this is not open for all applications. Otherwise, you would get 3 billion records collected here. So it would be quite a challenge. So you need to decide, which applications you want to track. And once you have done that, once you have put the flag, the next inventory import will capture locally in a specific table all these links that will allow this report to be fast. And the new column that we see here is this path exemption reason. So if I say is not empty, for instance, you will see here that a number of installations related to a specific path. So this is a demo system where we have put a little bit random values. CBEL makes sense, but maybe not this CZEB application. But if we go to the license, and I will, on this demo system, I've created a license, which is called Java all versions. If you open this license, you will see that there is a new section in the use rights and rules. And this new section, which is activated, for processor licenses, Oracle processor and user. So we have made it specific to Java. It could be extended in the future, which is activated when you have at least one title which is linked to which has a flag enabled. You get this UI, and then you can, put, for instance, %Oracle %client. This is the typical, typical path of the Oracle client. So you would definitely use the application transparency report to know where which path should be avoided, exempted. And then you can say, Oracle client here. And once you save that, okay, you save it. And once you have saved it, the next inventory import will check, or the next reconciliation, will check for each of the installations which have Oracle. If it sees that the path of installation of Java is including this pattern, it will flag the evidence. And then if all evidences related to one installation are flagged, it will flag the installation. And finally, if all installation consuming a license on a device are related to embedded path, one by one, that's where the complexity is, the reconciliation will flag up to the device and will have zero consumption. So in the end, that's a bottom-up approach. You understand what are the raw evidences, and just to show you here, if I take away this filter, if I group by device, let's group by device, and if I group by recognized Java, so recognized application. So if I take this one, for instance, you will see that we can have more than one evidence related to a given installed application. So you see here, this is the mess of Java. Here, we could ignore the installer evidences if we just focus on the files, and you see that we have two, builds of two different updates of Java 8, which are on this device. So typically, the supplementary product use on the license, as it was possible previously, or the exemption would be dangerous because one is maybe related to, let's say, here there is no clear actually embedded path, but you could have one which is related to the client and another which is maybe a licensable version of Java. So just to make it quick, because we're at the end of this presentation, you need to step by step, create the licenses, allocate the devices with these saved views, manage and expand the license definition to make sure that you embed your path, and then the reconciliation will do the job. It will automatically, evidence per evidence, find what is embedded and exclude it from the license consumption. So it's I would say it's not a 5 minutes activity, but it's way faster than what was needed. And even, that there was no way to understand the flat list of raw evidences for a cloud customer. So this is a nice progress. There will still be decisions to make, which are the embedded paths. Let's check if the application is really publicly embedding Java. And once you will have done this work, which is a little bit tedious, but we're talking about hours of work and not days, the reconciliation script will automatically manage that, knowing that to have an embedded installation, it needs to be recognized only through file evidences. So that's a step we are doing now, which is Unix is recognized through file evidences with the new agents. Windows has always been recognized through file evidences. So we are taking away the installer evidence to make sure that we have a 100% file evidence related recognition, which allows the algorithm to say, I see one installation related to only file evidences, which are all embedded. I will flag this installation not to consume any license. Okay, so that's all for the short presentation. And in the presentation, I've shown an example of saving the screen, which is based on the apply allocation and exemption. Saving the screen based on the operating system, and the recurring work is to make sure that you don't have any desktops or server which is coming in and not allocated, which would lead to a random consumption of one or the other license. That's it for today. Thanks for your time. That was a pleasure to talk to you, and sorry for the microphone issue at the beginning. Hope you heard me correctly for the full session. Thank you very much, and talk to you next month. I will publish in the community the announcements for the next webinar, and also the announcements for this recording that will be made available within 5 days. Thank you very much, and goodbye.